Good morning. I am here representing Steve Desch, who is very enthusiastic. So he's one of the people that Don called out about having too many slides. So I'm going to be skipping over a few things today. But it is a big project, so it's kind of forgivable. Our basic idea is that looking for habitable planets, telescope resources are going to be very limited because it's a difficult observation to do. So we need to step one step further beyond habitability and think about the detectability of biosignatures on other worlds, so we can get our best target selection for the next generation of direct imaging missions. And we're trying to do that by basically modeling everything that goes into a planet to produce and remove potential biosignatures. And this is starting out with what we refer to as stellar stoichiometry and planet formation. And that's looking at the composition of stars that are interesting to habitability, going through modeling the evolution of those stars and the coevolution of their habitable zones, and using those compositions as starting conditions for dust formation, planetary accretion, and planet formation in protoplanetary disks, and then hand it off to our geoscientists and have them do geophysical modeling of the planetary evolution and the geochemical cycling for these planets. And we have a couple of pilot projects looking at production and consumption of oxygen and methane in Earth analog environments to estimate biotic and abiotic production rates. And we have a large group of collaborators for this project. This is one of the larger groups in NExSS, including quite a few. Let's see. Yeah. There we go. Including quite a few international contributors in Brazil, in Portugal, and we've got a student coming over this fall from Bordeaux, and we are open for as many more as we can find. But one of the unique things that we have is our integration at the end. So in producing this library of planets where we look at formation processes and say, at this given distance from a star with a starting composition, we expect to have this range of planetary masses, this range of planetary compositions. What we're finding is probabilistic, so we are going to do a Bayesian analysis of the planet library that we develop, so we can go look at a potential target and say, given the composition of the star, if we see a 3 Earth mass planet at 1 AU out, the highest probability is that it's going to have this composition, and therefore we can say it's going to follow this geophysical evolution and have geophysical or geochemical cycling at these rates. And the other thing that our task lead for that is doing, Sarah Walker, is actually leading a group that sits in with the other researchers and facilitates communication between them. And since we have a lot of very different research going on, we just wanted to highlight one particular result which exemplifies the sort of things that we want to be doing in our group and with NExSS as a whole. This is work from Dan Shim's group, who is with us today, so if you have further questions, I encourage you to talk to him. But this research was sort of inspired by the idea that there is a substantial range in elemental abundances between stars, and in this case, looking at silicon and magnesium. Now, for planets with a lot of silicon relative to magnesium compared to Earth, it's been expected that you might have very high viscosities and perhaps retard convection and thermal transport, things like that. So in order to think more about this problem, what Dan has done is done high-pressure mineral experiments inspired by these stellar abundances on hydrous silica at high pressures. And what they have found is that you can break down the mineral species in very hydrous situations so that you actually can get significantly lowered viscosity in these high silicon to magnesium situations. So quite contrary to expectations, and really an impetus towards further research because it shows we cannot predict at this point what's going on in these planetary interiors. As far as collaborative projects, as was mentioned earlier by Daniel Apai, we had a workshop without walls focusing on this idea of how planetary interior processes affect atmospheric biosignatures, which brought together astrophysicists and planetary scientists. And that was co-hosted by the NExSS, NAI, and NSF. So really breaking down walls. And we had almost 200 participants, 50 to 60 local and twice that many virtual. And we brought in scientists from across the US and even from Japan to work on this. And in fact, we have a couple of publications planned from this project. And as a follow-up to it, we ran a winter school co-hosted by ASU and the AOS group at U of A. And this covered that same array of topics from astrophysics to geophysics. And as a capstone activity, the students and postdocs wrote proposals on some of these cross-disciplinary projects. And one thing that we are particularly proud of is that we've done a number of collaborative proposals as part of NExSS with institutions that were not in our original group. And one of them is the result of a draft proposal produced at the NExSS Winter School. And we've done quite a few visits to other institutions. This is just a list of what Steve has done, so we are actively trying to build new collaborations. Okay. So, given that we have a little bit of extra time, I'd like to highlight a couple other science results. Casey Lissa, who's also in the audience, has been doing a lot of work on protoplanetary disks and helping us on the observational side of planet formation. And Jenny Patience, who is here today, has been doing work on characterizing some protoplanetary and debris disks, looking at atmospheres of extrasolar planets through direct imaging with GPI. And a project that several of us are involved in is looking at the TESS continuous viewing zone and doing system characterization for those. We have a project looking at the abundances for those stars, doing stellar evolution calculations for them, doing comprehensive literature searches for putting together activity, rotation, UV and X-ray flux for the stars, and then doing some of this geophysical modeling to see what the potential mineral compositions are of these planets. And the kind of product that we want to see at the end of this is this periodic table of planets, where we look at things like Earth, water worlds, desert planets, and what we're calling weird worlds, which are planets with substantially non-terrestrial compositions and therefore non-terrestrial geophysics. And for each of these, we want to calculate abiotic production and destruction rates of oxygen and methane, and estimate what biological production we would require for those species in order for it to be observable in the planetary atmosphere. And we want to partner closely with VPL in order to figure out what those planetary atmospheres look like, because our expertise is on the planetary interior side. And that's a very brief overview of what we've got going on in our group. And since we have about 20 co-Is and quite a few collaborators, that only touches the surface. So if you would like to know more and learn about potential collaborations, we have a website, nexus.io, and please feel free to talk to any one of us who are here today. Thank you.
Any questions for Patrick?
I like this. This one? No, I'll just talk about it, although that doesn't help. I like this periodic table of exoplanets. It's very cool. Another possible way of conceiving a goal that's not necessarily compatible with this is something like an HR diagram of exoplanets, where we think of possible common evolutionary pathways. Of course, it's going to be much more complex than the stellar HR diagram, because planets are much more complex than stars. But it would be interesting and fun to think about what would be the relevant axes and how many dimensions it might be. And I bet somebody here has already come up with a clever way to think about this, but I'm intrigued by the idea that we're not just seeing snapshots in time, but we're seeing planets along long evolutionary pathways, just as with stars. And if we learn more, both theoretically and ultimately observationally, we may be able to place planets along evolutionary paths in the same way we've successfully been able to do with stars. And there's limited phase space that is taken up with stars. There's places that aren't occupied on the HR table, and it may be the same way with planets, that we can come up with these pathways and ultimately be able to recognize where planets are in that history, as well as a snapshot in time.
That is a fabulous idea, and it's certainly something we recognize, that all of these things are going to vary with time and how the planets have evolved. So looking at it in that systematic way would be great, yes.
It's a great idea to put a periodic table of planets, but I think that it's a little bit premature, because we need to characterize a host stars first. And we don't have comprehensive information about X-ray, XUV emission from, let's say, M dwarfs. The research only starting. We're in the first phase of characterization, and because those stars affect planets and affect water, for instance, to talk about even habitability zones, about H2O content, it's a little bit early.
I am a stellar evolution theorist at heart, so I am in total agreement with you on how difficult the stellar problem is, but the planetary stuff is something we can do in parallel, particularly the planetary interior stuff, and we do have people working on things like X-ray emission, high energy UV, and looking at theoretically how to describe that evolution, since observationally it's hard to constrain how that changes over time.